So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Philip Borino, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to the second of our four-part series with our trusted partner, STS Capital Partners. This series is around successful exits. And selling a business, as you know, can be a really complex and daunting process, from finding the right buyer to addressing legal concerns, to ensuring that you receive the best value for your company. And this special series brings together a number of seasoned experts from STS Capital Partners who will provide you with actionable advice on industry best practices, avoiding, navigating potential pitfalls, and ultimately achieving a successful exit. So in this second webinar, we'll be gaining some valuable insights on preparing your business for sale and navigating the process to ensure a successful and profitable sale. And we're going to be joined by STS Capital's Managing Director at Kempten Schwab. Just some housekeeping. Kempten will be presenting, but we will be sure to allow for plenty of time for Q&A. Only thing that we ask is that you put the questions in the general chat box and not write directly to Kempten, as he will not be reading the messages during the presentation. So without further ado, welcome Kempten, and it's really great to have you today, and we're honored.
Well, thank you, Philip. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the time of each individual who decided to join us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Angie and I both work with an organization by the name of STS Capital Partners. And we're going to try to give you some information a little bit more in depth about, the process of selling the business. And really today's discussion is going to be oriented around some of the advanced readiness associated with a transaction. Most of what I speak of is going to be targeted towards the perspective of an owner or an equity holder inside of a company. If you're a hired gun or a significant influencer inside of the ownership of an organization, obviously it's really important that you begin to think about these things in advance of what might be going on with regard to any equity transactions inside of your company. So I can field questions from all different levels, but most of the conversation is going to be targeted to those that are sitting in a position of actually monetizing the equity they have in their business. Angie, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide deck. So I think this is a great place to start today. And it's the reason why I put this on the screen, because a lot of times this triggers an event within an organization that causes them to explore the idea of selling a business. And we've all seen them, right? Whether it's on a newspaper, those are actually things that you pick up and read, like the Wall Street Journal, or something you see on your computer screen that says XYZ company sells to ABC company, and you see some astronomical number around it. And you sit there and go, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Or you're at the coffee house and you hear, did you know about Bill? Bill sold his business for $500 million and he was only making like $500 a year. How did that happen? That's a little bit obviously of hyperbole, but the idea is that there's constant buzz around transactions, and some of it and often is not necessarily true. And rarely do you see behind the scenes of the headline and what actually the terms and conditions look like of the transaction. But more importantly, even behind the T's and C's associated with the deal, why is somebody actually buying a business for whatever the reason is and for whatever terms and conditions have been decided upon? So what we're going to talk about today is kind of the mental readiness of getting yourself ready to become one of those headlines, and how you become one that's incredibly positive versus one that's just a blurb that no one understands. Angie, if you could advance the deck. So I think this is really the first part of the presentation today, is around what I would call the industrial psychological components of going into a transaction. Most of the time when a business is sold, it is reactive in nature. And I want to encourage those of you that actually own and or are significant in the C, are in a significant role in the C-suite of a business, to be proactive about the monetization of equity. And when I say reactive, is death, disease, divorce, disenfranchisement with the business, there's a downturn. These are the D's associated with a transaction that cause somebody to react to going into selling their company. What we want to do when we're getting mentally ready for a transaction is to always be thinking about how we can position our business in the best and most favorable light for a positive monetization event, not reacting to something that's negative in our lives that cause us to put distress and make a decision either post haste or in an environment that's not mentally right to actually go through the transaction itself. I often ask, if we were in a big room, I'd ask the audience, what percentages of businesses do you think go through an exit? And if you're in a big room, depending upon the audience, you get a variety of answers. People are like, oh, 20%. Some people say 50%. Some people say 5%. The reality is 100% of all businesses go through an exit. The question is that a favorable event or is that a not favorable event? Obviously, bankruptcy is probably not a favorable event. A proactive strategic transaction to an organization that values the business that they're acquiring more than the existing owners is a positive event. So what we want to do is mentally prepare ourselves to get to that second example, not the first. And part of getting there is really within the ownership of an entity, understanding fundamentally why you want to sell. More than just the business, but where you are in your life, where you are with your company, with regard to why you would want to explore an exit at that time. It could be, my company was a means to an end and I've got it large enough to now I'm not passionate about the business anymore. I believe that I've positioned it perfectly for someone else to own it. And I'm now ready to actually let go of the business. It could be, I inherited this organization and I really have siblings that are putting pressure on me to be a part of the company and I don't know where to put them. And so I actually need to go through a process of getting this in someone else's hands that could do more with it, because I cannot take the internal strife at the Thanksgiving dinners with regard to my siblings who are owning this business with me. So there can be a variety of reasons as to why you want to sell a company, but it's very important that you, with your trusted advisors, understand the root cause of the reason to go through a transaction. If you can't quickly have an internal elevator pitch as to why you want to sell a company, you probably don't want to sell it. The next piece is, are you mentally ready for the change? Because once you conclude a transaction, life as is professionally will most likely be significantly different. If you are the senior and majority shareholder and you actually sell a majority of the company and retain a minority in the business, you are going to now have a supervisor that's interested in the financial outcomes of the company. If you're going to do a full exit, you're going to be unemployed. Those are the mental changes that might happen in your professional life. Are you ready for them? And then the last thing is, if you have shareholders in a business, are you all aligned at 1, 2, and now the third part of getting ready for a transaction? And that is, do you all see alignment in why you're going to market and what your outcomes are? I would invite you to consider, if there are 2 shareholders in a business and one thinks the business is worth $100 million and the other thinks the business is worth $500 million, it's going to be really difficult to conclude a sale at $250 million to a third party. And so you need to see shareholder alignment, not just in why you're going through the exercise of monetizing equity, but also that there is a reasonable alignment with the expectations and the outcomes expected from the event. So I know I went really fast and really quick at this first slide, but I want to stop there and see if there's anything that conversationally comes up. Take a moment, make a note, and when we get to the Q&A part, feel free to come back to this. Angie, if you could advance the slide. So if we're through the industrial psychology component of this and we're mentally ready, we have shareholder alignment, and we now know that there's a reason to actually monetize equity in the business. Now the question is, what are we taking to market? I use a real estate metaphor a lot in conversations because most people have bought or sold a house. And in a lot of cases, people buy or sell a house because they're required to move, or they've got to grow they're growing their family, or they're shrinking their family. And the question is beyond just what are the comps in your neighborhood, what do you have in your house? How is it constructed? What actually makes your house better than the house across the street? Perhaps is there, and this term of art's used in our industry a lot, perhaps you have a Rembrandt in your attic. If two houses are in the same neighborhood and both built by the same builder, and one has a priceless piece of art in the attic and one does not, the valuation of the first house is dramatically different than the valuation of the second house. So the key is to find the Rembrandts in your business's attic. And here's a couple of examples that are beneath here that we can talk about that will reveal the Rembrandts in an attic, and understanding how you want to position your business for a transaction. So a lot of that is deeply, accurately, and comprehensively updating and maintaining an inventory of all of the assets inside of the business. That is your employees, their employment agreements, your customer agreements, your vendor agreements, all of the information associated with any real estate or other assets that you own, anything that you have on the balance sheet, and how buttoned up is your business. How much of your operation is done on a handshake versus how much of it can be transferable. All of those things that go into the actual inventory of an enterprise is important to have all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted before you go into a process of putting your business on the market. The second thing is, have you done a layer deep of understanding the process and procedures of why you're successful and the technology in the business that you're using and what it actually solves that could be solved for other organizations, either as direct competitors or in adjacencies to your organization. An example I use of this is if you think about, let me give you an example of the first two. So perhaps in the contractual and asset inventory, perhaps you may, or your business may have transferable contracts with state and local jurisdictions in the United States for services. If those are transferable because of the procurement costs associated with getting those vehicles, and they are transferable, then all of a sudden you bring with you a government procurement vehicle into the transaction that the buyer would not have to acquire, they would not have to get on their own. If you think about processes or procedures, an example there is perhaps you're manufacturing something in Mexico, and by manufacturing a product in Mexico, you benefit from the Maquiladora program, which is a part of the NAFTA, a part of the free trade between Mexico and the United States, and you can ship unencumbered, and you globally ship out of Long Beach in Southern California, and you're best in the world at actually manufacturing a product in Mexico and shipping it out of the United States. You might be attractive to someone that's facing new restrictions in manufacturing in China. And so they might want to acquire your footprint in Mexico, your processes and procedures of logistics shipping around the world out of Southern California. So these are things that you may have as competencies in your business, as well as assets in your business that you need to think through. Ultimately, that then leads to the team. who actually is a part of delivering for your customer base, who is on the team, who are the critical components, are they fairly compensated, are they in harmony with one another, do they work well together, do they have excess capacity, are they doing more than they can, have they reached their Peter principle, how well are you structured, do you have gaps in that, do you have bottlenecks where an individual employee is controlling too much inside of your company's operation, or do you have compensation that's out of line with market? All of those things are going to reveal themselves when you put your business onto the market and for sale and in due diligence. And so it's better that you get yourself ready in advance versus learn these things after a buyer starts to peek underneath the covers of your operation and realizes that your chief operating officer holds way too many of the customer relationships that are necessary, and you don't have an employment agreement with that person that's transferable into a transaction. So there's all sorts of things inside of the human resource aspects of your business that need to be documented and understood before going to market. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, complete customer documentation. When you're early in your business life cycle, a lot of times you compromise terms and conditions to get the business, whether those are payment terms, whether those are, hey, listen, we just do this on a handshake. We really don't need a firm agreement. I definitely don't need to execute an agreement that I can transfer. So I'll go ahead and give you the right to deny the transferability of a contract if you're doing an asset sale versus a stock sale. That could be difficult. So all these things require you to think about your customer documentation and where you are with the organizations that drive revenue inside of your business. So I'll stop there for a couple minutes and let you guys take some notes and prepare some questions. And get a little coffee as well. All right, Angie, if you could advance the deck, please. So now that you have this fundamental comprehensive inventory of your business at your fingertips, you're emotionally and mentally ready to go through a transaction. You now know what your business has and doesn't have. You can begin to think about positioning it not from the lens of the existing ownership, but looking at your company through the lens of the person that's going to acquire it. And this is the real art of actually finding a successful transaction that makes a headline, is to get yourself out of your own way as the owner of a business and what it means to you, and think objectively about what that company that's buying your business means to them. And what I mean by that is a business is going to have a balance sheet and financial statements. And as an owner, you're going to be really oriented to those two aspects of your company. You're going to know exactly what your performance is. And you're going to hear things in the industry when you go through a sale is, what are the multiples of your industry? What are they trading on a revenue multiple? Is it trading on an EBITDA multiple? All I'm telling you is that those are just ingredients in a transaction. The real ability to get a successful transaction done is to not be thinking about just your financial condition, but what your business looks like inside of the pro forma of the entity that's going to acquire you. That is what's going to happen to the asset after the transaction. So, for example, you might be a business that's owned by a single shareholder in the United States, and you might have impediments to being successful because of the makeup of that ownership structure, where you might be being acquired by a disadvantaged business who potentially has access to opportunities that your company does not under your ownership. That's a really simple example, but their pro forma of what they can do with the company after they buy you is far more lucrative to them than anything you could do as the existing ownership group with the business as it's constituted today. And the more you can begin to think about that integrated investment thesis by the buyer into your business versus what the business means to you and what it's worth to you, the better you will be as you objectively go through each phase of the transaction so that you know why they're acquiring your company, not just what you're selling it for. And so I would invite all parties to be thinking about that customized investment thesis from the buyer's perspective, not just the reasons why you're successful in owning and operating the company itself. So Angie, if you could advance the slide, I'm going to give a visual representation of that. And I'm going to apologize in advance for anyone that's on this call that is involved in private equity or in venture capital, because there's nothing wrong with those businesses, but their business is to make proper investments and to buy organizations and to advance them and to sell them for more than they bought them. If you look at the left side of your screen, those are your entrepreneurial and family-owned businesses, which make up a majority of the privately held businesses, obviously, in the world. And they come in all different sizes. Some are small, some are large. They come across various industries, and they began with an entrepreneurial idea and have grown into something that is unique, successful. It's amazing. It's always got almost 100% of those businesses have an amazing story to tell, and they're really worth learning and deeply understanding how someone took an idea and turned it into a successful enterprise. And on the far right of your screen, you have your strategic acquirers that are typically global in nature. And what I was speaking about in the previous slide is fundamentally understanding those businesses' shapes and sizes, because they're all different shapes and all different sizes. And then thinking about how the business you're owning or operating as a one shape, different size fits into that other enterprise, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an acquisition standpoint by the buyer into your company. So Angie, I don't know if there's any more graphic on this slide. There may be a touch more. Yep. And the real art is to bypass just the financial justification for a transaction, i.e. I can buy a business that's generating $20 million in return on $100 million in revenue for $100 million at 5 times multiple. And in 5 years, I can get my business back. And if I grow it, I might be able to get more. We can think beyond that and think about, what does my $100 million business look like inside of a $2.5 billion entity as it makes that investment and extrapolates all the processes, procedures, customer orientation, employees, and all the aspects of my Rembrandts in my attic inside of their company, what they're going to do with it. That is when you become a headline that gets talked about in coffee shops, golf courses, and potentially on the cover of Forbes magazine. Angie, if you advance the deck. So I'll stop there. And at the request of our moderator, we were asked to put together a little bit of information about why the firm that we work with, STS, is a little different than your traditional operators in the investment banking industry. And so I'll give this brief explanation, then we'll go on to Q&A. We're a bit different because we really believe in owners representing owners. Before I had the role with STS, I was an operating executive and an equity holder in a privately held business that actually utilized the competencies from STS to orchestrate my own exit in 2017. So as a managing director within our firm, I'm empathetic to all owners. I sat in that seat. I understand exactly what that life was like. I understand all the ups and downs of the process of going through a monetization event, having multiple shareholders in the business. And there's no better experience than real life. For those of you that happen to be in a large wealth management house, I apologize. I much met with the gentleman that was running the M&A for a name brand organization. I asked him about the company he sold when he started his career. And he said, "Oh, I never have sold a business. I mean, I went to business school at Harvard and I took that onto Wall Street and I fashioned myself through investment banking. And now I'm running a very large wealth management organization and specializing in doing the M&A for our clients." And quite honestly, in that situation, I said, well, it's really difficult for you to be qualified and sit alongside of an owner who's poured their life's work or multiple generations' life work into the monetization of their event. You're looking at it from the piece of paper, not into the heart. So we're owners representing owners, non-conflicted, strictly representing businesses that are wanting to go through the sales side in an independent and objective manner. Almost like Jerry Maguire in the movie, Jerry Maguire. We care about more than just the money. We want to find you the Quan, for those of you that have seen the film. We're industry agnostic, shareholder focused. We don't do buy side. We don't do cap raises. We strictly think about the outcomes that our owners seek in a majority transaction. And we make sure we specialize and customize our role with each and every person we work with. We care about deal quality over deal flow. Being post-exit, I've got the time, the patience, and the willingness to find the right buyer for our clients, not just to try to run through and get as many deals done as I can in a certain calendar event. We try to think through the creative investment and at some point get underneath the buyer's perspective and understand why they're making an investment and how it's going to generate value for their shareholders. And by finding out and building trust, leveraging open and transparent discussions with buyers, you can often get perspective into why they're wanting to acquire a company and help them build their own investment thesis for their investment committees. And then this one's unique, is that a lot of times our clients will have multiple organizations looking at their business from different angles. And so you've got to work through a soft auction process where people are thinking about buying the business for different reasons. And it's really understanding why a bucket of apples is maybe more valuable than a bucket of oranges or a carton of bananas. And you've got to be able to understand all the different nuances there and negotiate through each of those individually to the successful outcome of the seller. And then lastly, at STS, I'm honored to be a part of a firm and have a peer group around the world that we reach to when necessary. So whether that's in Amsterdam or Singapore or Buenos Aires, we do reach around the world, and it's nice to be independent, objective on the sales side only and global in nature. So I think I'll stop there. I wanted to keep it at about 30 minutes for the presentation and keep around 30 minutes for Q&A. And so I'll open it up to the floor and happy to field any questions that come. Angie or Jamie, if you guys can just kind of direct me to the questions that are there.
Farhan has a question. Farhan, would you like to turn your mic on and ask?
Sure thing. Yeah, so I saw a bullet point about variable thesis auction. I'd love to hear about what that means, and also, just selfishly speaking, what hospitality or property management companies you've advised on the exit.
Okay. On the variable thesis auction, the concept is that let me think about an analogy, or a real life experience. So if you're selling a business that, let's just say, is building substations for electrical grids. And so they're building substations, and their real skill set is in safety, process, procedure, the cross training of resources, management of subcontractors, and that's what they do when they build substations for power companies around the country. The underlying reason that they're successful, as I said, is in their process, procedures, cross training. So you might have different businesses that are wanting to acquire that firm. So you have to take all of the components that those buyers are going to buy and going to think about what it means inside of their operation. So let's say that let's just keep it inside the utility space. Let's say one organization is in industrial refrigeration, and they're going to buy this business because they want to have an extension into substation construction, but they want to take all those processes and procedures and deliver them in really large industrial refrigeration projects. What does that investment thesis look like for that business in the refrigeration industry? Mm-hmm. And let's just say another company is looking at buying that business, and they're in fabrication of metalworks. And so they're going to have a different thesis. And the key is to have the refrigeration business and the metalworks business both bidding on this electrical contractor or this electrical construction company, but their reason for buying it is different. But the extrapolation of value inside the company has of each company has a different pro forma, and allowing them to bid against each other for the same business. Mm-hmm. Hope that answers the question. And then in the hospitality industry, can you be a little bit more specific so I can speak more specifically to you?
Right. So an asset light management company that manages properties. In my case, it's furnished rentals, almost like Airbnb management.
Yes. So have some experience in vacation rentals, particularly in the Appalachian Mountains, and how to position that business was really a lot of it was around their marketing and their ability to actually acquire customers and their ability to separate themselves with regard to some of their search engine skills. And so that one transaction was a little small in nature that I personally was a part of a while ago, but that was a fun one. That was a friend of mine that was in the YPO sector. So there is some experience there for me personally. And then as far as the organization is concerned, I think we have some experiences a little bit more broadly brushed with that. But more importantly than the sector where you're finding success, what we're going to want to do is drop down to that next layer of what do you actually do and why do you do it and how are you doing it better than anyone else, and how are we going to bring that forward to someone that would want to acquire those competencies.
Thank you.
So we have a question also from B. Connors. Would you like to turn your camera on or mask? If not, he's asking or she's asking, what are your fees for A, retainer, and B, success?
So our fee schedule is customized for every client, and they're really going to be oriented around the required and preferred outcomes of the owners that are going to go through this process. And so there is no one size fits all. There's typically a combination of a monthly fee that is paid for commitment. We're both committed to this process, and we have a team of people that are going to work on it. And then there is obviously a success fee that is going to be graduated on our ability to exceed those outcomes as required by the shareholders. So there is no fixed set fee schedule. Everything is customized. And to be candid with you, we try to make sure that the fee schedule is the last thing we speak about, because if we understand why we're selling a business, we understand that the business has got strategic
and she might have interest in, who might have interest in purchasing you beyond the obvious. And I have been through a sale before, and it was interesting who came out of the woodworks. And so that's always the mystery for me.
So I'll do it through an analogy without getting into some of the secret sauce of our organization in a public forum. But the best analogy I can give you is in my previous life, I had to go through the security clearance process for the United States Department of Defense. And if there's anybody on the call that's been through that process, this will really resonate with them. But for those that haven't, you think about yourself and you say, okay, well, my name is Kempten. I was born in Greenville, North Carolina. Here's my date of birth. Here's my social security number. Here are my parents. Here's where I work. Here's where I live. That's a simple application. Let me submit that. But when the United States decides to either grant or not grant you access to information that's necessary for our success as a nation, they're going to dig a little more deeply with regard to you as an individual. And they're going to build out what we refer to as kind of the Christmas tree associated with a person, not just the star at the top of the tree that's shining. We're going to do a lot of that similar work when dissecting the business that we're going to put forward in front of strategic buyers. And by doing that work and mind mapping deeply inside of a company at all aspects of an operational successful business, opportunities will reveal themselves of organizations that are in variable adjacencies that we then can create a customized investment thesis for in the back of an envelope pitch that we can make. And oftentimes we're positioning it to someone that hasn't thought about making an acquisition in that manner. And so you're bringing concepts forward that haven't been realized before. And by doing that next level depth of work, you're able to find buyers. And then we use our network to get to the C-suite of people we want there.
Great. So Jose has 3 different questions. What are the size range of deals that you typically take? Is his first question.
Yeah, sure. So most of the businesses we work with are in the 50 to 500 million enterprise value range. However, more importantly than deal size for us is character of ownership. And so if we can see rationale for going through an exit, we can see a high integrity, transparent ownership group or cap table. We can see strategic value in a business that's ready for a global representation. And we can see alignment within shareholders, then we're going to be inclined to work with that organization more than we're motivated by deal size. And I've been a part of transactions smaller than 50 million and north of $1 billion.
Excellent. His second question was, what regions and countries do you work in?
All over the world, but the majority of our work is in Pan-Asia, Europe, and North America. We do some work in South America, South Africa, and the Middle East, but the bulk of our work is really where you would see and where you would think the industrialized world is operating.
Excellent. Excellent. Robert also had a question. Robert, do you want to, perhaps you can address the 2 questions that you posted here?
Sure. So I understand that one needs to create a custom investment thesis for each likely potential acquirer, but presumably you're starting from some poor basis to make some sort of forecast of the potential future value to the acquirer. And so
that's right.
So the question is, generally speaking, what is that? Is it a multiple of revenue or of EBITDA? And then I have other.
Oh, it depends. It totally depends. There is no one size fits all with regard to some multiple. You can see, if you're going to represent someone, you can look at comparables in that industry and where you can see transactions have occurred that are publicized, and you can kind of see a situation of where multiples are made available, but we only look at that as a data point.
Right.
What we're going to try to do is understand that pro forma for a party that is, and we're not doing that for everybody that's on the outreach list. We're doing that. We're targeting the outreach list. We're making sure that we can see a reason why someone should look at buying the business. And then whenever we start to see that mutual interest, both from seller and buyer, we begin to then develop the investment thesis. So go ahead.
I get that. That makes sense. But so my sense or knowledge of this up to this point has been that more often, nevertheless, it would still be the revenue would be the most useful metric to use to look at the comps of prior transactions to sort of get a ballpark before then with the serious potential acquirers doing the custom stuff. And the reason that my understanding was that revenue would be better is that it's cleaner. You can't manipulate revenue as easily as EBITDA, because EBITDA could be based on you have more costs, et cetera, but the acquirer wouldn't necessarily have all of those same costs given their infrastructure, and that it would be a cleaner thing to forecast by plugging it into their infrastructure once they are acquired. Is that fair in your mind?
That's a very fair line of thinking. What I would tell you, though, is that when you get beyond, and revenue is a very wonderful multiple upon which to present a business. You know, but when you get beneath that level of just revenue and you get into EBITDA, then you can really work on normalizing EBITDA with regard to expenses that are made for future growth and expenses that are made for existing operation, and being able to show to a acquiring party what a normalized EBITDA would look like inside of that business if you wanted to look at it strictly from a cash performance standpoint. But again, when we're representing our seller, we don't want to have people buying it because they want to generate cash out of the organization. We're looking at trying to, because the existing ownership could do that themselves, right? What we're trying to do is find owners that can do more with the business than what the existing owners can.
Exactly. So, suppose, let's just take revenue for a second there, because it is cleaner and is very often used as the starting point to come up with this sort of forecast. Would it be the most like the trailing 12 months? Would it be the most recent sort of high point month to then consider a run rate going forward? Would it be MRR or MRR? What would be?
All of the above.
Okay.
You're going to try to position the most favorable manner forward, and you're going to try to drive the reason why that is the way to look at it.
Right.
But there is no one size fits all with regard to how you're going to position the financial components of the existing operation.
All right. Then the last part of this is, so now when you get to sort of the custom investment thesis where you're forecasting to this specific acquirer what difference it might make to their business, how far ahead are you forecasting? Are you looking at the next 3 years, the next 5 years?
You're looking at what is realistically achievable post-transaction, whether that be in the short or the long term, or maybe both. And so you're not just looking at a specific timeline as much as, so if you're acquiring a business, as I used an earlier example in the presentation, that happens to have, let's just say, 99.8% retention rate with government contracts across multiple jurisdictions in North America, you can project that significantly out into the future.
Right.
Or if you're positioning a business that's very project oriented underneath brands that have a lot of volatility, you may not be able to project that out very far into the future. So you're going to have to be able to be wise with regard to positioning that forward thinking ownership as possible.
So that gives you a level of confidence of how sure we are that, say, the government contracts is like guaranteed, whereas, you know, a new market might not be. But from the acquirer's standpoint, do they typically have a time frame within which they want to have paid for this business, and then thereafter it's like it's all additive to them? So like within 3 years, 5 years, it doesn't. There's no generalization.
It's all over the board. There's no one. I mean, there's no one-to-one. I mean, there's no twins in that world.
Okay.
That is all, and it depends upon who's actually driving the acquisition within the buyer's entity. So if they're driving it because they want to gather the revenue and they want to grow revenue rapidly, that's one aspect. If they're buying it for operational efficiencies, that's another area. If they're buying it because they want to acquire the management team and deploy that talent somewhere else, that's another. There's another thesis. So it's really all over the board.
So therefore, in conclusion, maybe you would make, say, an up to a 5-year projection forecast for each of the 5 years and try to make the case that, look, it's growing like this. It'll make this much additional revenue to you, the acquirer. and then they'll argue about what they care about and pay you this much for that future. Is that?
Well, I mean, personally, when I'm in those conversations, I'm really seeking to understand first. And so I'm going to try to really understand the inner workings of the acquirer and know what buttons that they're really trying to, and boxes they're trying to check, and how they think and how they operate. And then I'm going to try to make sure that our client is positioned to check all of those boxes, whether that's for 5 years or 50 years or 5 months.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Wonderful.
I was really trying to nail down something, and you're sticking to it. That there are no twins. So, but it's still helpful to hear your answer to that. So,
I mean,
thank you.
I mean, I could, it would be wrong if I told you otherwise. And I would tell you that somebody that gives you data that's to the contrary is not taking the time to really do the work that's necessary to succeed in a really high level transaction.
Right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Robert. So we have a question from Ryan that's been upvoted twice. So Ryan, would you like to share to ask your question here?
Yeah, I definitely can. And I don't know if I'm on screen, but I guess it's moot at this point.
Yes,
thank you
are.
for taking the time to speak with us, especially share your knowledge. I mean, you definitely get some contacts hopefully out of this, but it's taking the time to go through each question. We appreciate it. Well, I wanted to get to. Thank you. I wanted to get to what I thought was going to be the heart of the conversation, although I guess like you need to meet us where we are and we all have different backgrounds. Is you had mentioned, you gave us a conceptual framework for how we're supposed to basically sell ourselves, not only talk about the finances, but also talk about the value you bring beyond that, the strategic value. And you gave examples that seem largely in the realm of logistics. You mentioned geographic and distribution, et cetera. If you were going to categorize the other strategic values that companies can offer to those that acquire them, what would they be? And then basically just an extension of that, what are the ones that are commonly overlooked by those who sell themselves based on your transaction history? And thank you.
No problem. So if you were to categorize, you would see customer base, employee base, geographic base, process, procedure, operational expertise. Those are big levels. Technology, and then in today's world, data science, data analytics, leveraging of information, and ability to actually position data forward. So those are some of your big, broad brushes that you can see beyond just logistics. As far as things that I see today, I'm actually on a site right now where there's a lot of churn in a positive way in this business, and the level of depth in data mining and the level of depth of what I would call transitive information knowledge from data that's available is really interesting for me to learn about. And that's very unique to this current situation. And so you might see something that reveals itself that we may go into the first meeting not even realizing, and the owner of the business may not even realize they have in their inventory, but reveals itself through discussions with potential acquirers.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. And Murray actually has a question here. He's wondering what the marketing side of the business is. Murray, did you want to expand on that thought?
Yeah, I was kind of curious about, how a business owner might be able to help you guys make the sell. For example, in the VC world, it's like a pitch deck and so on and so forth, executive summary. So do you guys have a kind of recommended set of marketing or sell tools? For example, which you say that, well, we should have a pitch deck. Number 2, we should have videos. Number 3, we should be working our own networks and things like that.
Yes, yes, and yes. So the first thing I will tell you is one of the most vital members of the deal team is the owner themselves, or the key owner. Because as much as we can learn about a business, there's no way that we can learn all the intricacies and put that company in a more favorable light than the existing owner can. So they are a part of the process and a very vital part of the process. As far as your traditional things, what we try to do is build out what's referred to in our industry as a confidential information memorandum that is going to really dig deeply into the aspects of the company that we're presenting. And then once you build out what I would call that the encyclopedia of the business, then that's going to reveal what you put on an anonymized teaser, which would be a simple one pager that would excite people about looking at the company. And then once you get past that, you will have oftentimes management presentations where there are various pitch decks and various slide presentations presented to acquirers that are customized for their viewpoint based on the discussions at hand. So there are materials that we develop in concert with our client that ultimately become a work product of our client, but we use our experience and our expertise to develop those types of materials that we put forward, and then they evolve based on the potential buyers that are coming to the table.
I had a quick question for you, Kempten. As someone who works with companies on their international business development, one of the, obviously one of the routes to enter a new market is by acquisition. And so I think what one of the offerings that STS has of actually looking outside of a domestic market for potential matches is really powerful. It's extremely powerful, because I mean, I see that every single day with companies that say, oh, I want to make it into, enter the European market. Let me find a strategic partner there, or vice versa, into North America or into Asia. And my question is, how do you go about identifying and vetting internally? Is that via your existing network?
Yes, it's a lot of that's through the existing network. And then obviously when we're thinking about, most of the transactions that I personally work on are North American based, but if I'm going to entertain a acquiring party from another company, I'm going to really understand what their footprint looks like globally, where they're having success, where they're operationally delivering products and services, what kind of standing they're in before bringing them forward to, a successful North American organization. So I'm in the middle of a project right now that's out of the South Central United States, and being on the Mississippi River is a very important component of that transaction. And there's a lot of European interest in this business. And so I'm going to understand exactly how they're operating in Western Europe today and why they're being successful there and how that's going to be applicable over here, and that their quality of performance and their reputation precedes them, and that it is not just somebody that is coming at this from a fly-by-night perspective.
Sure. Thank you. So we have time for one more question. Robert, you have two there. Do you want to jump in and ask one quickly? We have 3 minutes left.
Well, first one real quick is how about partnerships as a Rembrandt value add? Any value put on them, or now a new entity, will the partnership not be able to necessarily transfer to the acquirer?
No, the partnership can transfer. Absolutely.
Okay.
It could be a vital ingredient in the transfer.
Right. Okay. The more interesting question I thought is, so what have you run into examples where the startup has a board of directors that formed an exit committee, whether it's called that or not, that say maybe 3 people, the CEO plus 2 others, where it's not just the CEO on your team involved, but it's actually a subcommittee of the board of directors, so that it offloads some of the effort from the CEO and is more representative of the whole board?
Absolutely. As long as there's alignment with the participation in the deal team, then we welcome participation. But the alignment is the key, and not duplication of effort. I don't need 3 people sitting on the deal team that all are representing the same interests that are fully aligned. They can sit on the deal team, be a part of the transaction, and go back to their exit committee, if you will. So and then they can rotate. I mean, we are not discriminatory. We only discriminate against quality of capacity.
So you do see more than just the CEO, or not too often?
Yeah, you typically see CEO, CFO on a regular basis. Sometimes a vice president of strategic development or vice president of business development, somebody in that area is often involved. So it's really more who is a part of the organization that fundamentally understands the business and can look beyond its existing constitutional components and into the eyes of the buyer without letting their emotions and their own pride of ownership get in the way.
Excellent. I know.
Well, I appreciate y'all's time today. Thank you very much. I think if you start typing Kempten in Google, I'm one of the, other than a city in Germany, I think you'll find me. And my contact information is on the screen, and I'll be happy to visit with anybody independently afterwards. So I wish you all the best. Angie, Jamie, Philip, thank you very much for having me today. And I hope that you got a little bit more value out of this than the time you spent on it.
Thank you, Kempten. Really fantastic information. And thank you all for joining us today.